All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to untangle one of the most common points of confusion for JavaScript developers, and that is the whole let versus var debate. It seems like such a small thing, but trust me, it can make a world of difference in how your code behaves.
So, here's the game plan. We're going to start with a classic little coding puzzle that, believe me, trips up a lot of people. From there, we'll dig into the old way of doing things with var, see why it's so tricky, and then introduce the modern fix, let. We'll also touch on some other key differences, say a quick hello to Const, and then wrap it all up with a simple toolkit you can start using right away. Okay, first up, a classic JavaScript puzzle. This is a famous little bit of code that has been puzzling developers for a long, long time.
So the question is, what will this famous little code snippet actually print to the console? Take a second, look at it, and make a guess.
Okay, so here's the code. It looks simple enough, right? We've got a basic for loop, it runs 3 times, and we're using var for our counter, I. Inside the loop, there's this set timeout, which is supposed to wait a tiny bit and then print out the value of I. So logically, you'd think it would print 0, then 1, then 2. That makes sense. But is that what actually happens?
Yeah, here's the surprising answer. It actually prints my value 3 times in a row. So what in the world is going on here? This is the mystery we're going to solve. And the culprit, believe it or not, is that little 3-letter keyword var.
All right, let's get into the old way of doing things. To understand why that puzzle behaves so unexpectedly, we've got to look at var, and let's call them quirky rules. Okay, the number one thing to understand about var is that it has what's called function scope. So what does that mean? It means a var variable doesn't really care about the curly braces of a for loop or an if statement. It's like it can just float right out of those blocks and is visible to the entire function it lives in. Here's a perfect example of what I mean. See how we declare moo inside these curly braces? You'd think it would stay in there, but nope, we can still log it outside. The var variable basically leaks out of its block. And that is exactly what happened in our puzzle. There wasn't a separate I for each loop. There was only one single I variable that all 3 of those set timeout functions had to share.
And to make things even weirder, there's another concept called hoisting. With var, JavaScript kind of moves the declaration part, just the var I part, to the very top of its scope before any code runs. So by the time our set timeout functions finally get around to running, that for loop is long gone, it's finished. And what's the final value of that single shared I variable? It's 3. So every single one of those functions looks at that same variable and prints out 3.
So how do we fix this mess? This is where we bring in the modern fix, let. This one key word is going to solve our whole problem.
So let is the hero of our story here because it has block scope. This is the game changer. A variable you declare with let is basically locked inside the block, those curly braces, where you define it. It cannot escape. It's trapped, which is exactly what we want.
And here it is, the big aha moment. Look at the code side by side. On the left with var, we have our problem. One shared I leads to the output 3, 3, 3. But on the right, the only thing we changed was var to let. And boom, we get the output we actually wanted all along, 0, 1, and 2. It's that simple. So what's the magic here? Why does this work so well? When you use let inside a for loop, JavaScript does something really clever. For each spin of the loop, it creates a brand new, fresh copy of I. It's like each set timeout gets its own little snapshot of I, with the correct value, 0, then 1, then 2, frozen in time just for itself. Okay, but it's not just about block scope. Let's dive a little deeper into some of the other key differences between let and var, because there are a few more reasons why let is just safer.
This table gives us a really nice summary. We've already hammered on scope, function for var, block for let. But look at the other rows. How they handle hoisting is different. How they interact with the global window object is different. And whether you can redeclare them is also different. These are all subtle but really important safety features that let gives us. Let's talk about that hoisting one next.
All right, get ready for this one. It's a concept with a super dramatic name, but it's actually an amazing feature for preventing bugs. It's called the temporal dead zone. So what is this dead zone? Check this out. On the left, if we try to use a var variable before we declare it, we just get undefined. No error, just weird behavior. But on the right, if you try the same thing with let, you get a hard reference error. The program stops. And that error is a feature. That little sliver of time from when the block starts to when the let variable is actually declared, That's the temporal dead zone. It's a safety net that stops you from using a variable before it's ready. And there are a couple more big differences. First, if you declare a var out in the open, not in a function, it actually attaches itself to the global window object in a browser. This can cause all sorts of messy conflicts with other scripts. Let doesn't do that, which is much cleaner. Also, var will happily let you redeclare the same variable over and over in the same scope, which is just asking for bugs. Let is much stricter and will throw an error, forcing you to write cleaner code.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about let, but what about its close cousin const? This is another keyword you'll see all the time in modern JavaScript. So const is basically just like let in that it's block scoped. The big, huge difference is that you cannot reassign a const variable. Once you set it, it's set. You also have to give it a value right when you declare it. But, and this is a really important but, const does not make the value itself unchangeable. If your const is an object or an array, you can still change the properties inside that object. You just can't assign a whole new object to that variable.
All right, we've covered a ton of ground, so let's wrap this all up into your modern toolkit. Here's some simple, practical advice for writing modern JavaScript. Here are the best practices, boiled down to 3 simple rules. 1. Defaults to const. Just use it for everything, unless you know you need to change it. It signals your intention that a value shouldn't change. 2. Use let, but only when you know you're going to need to reassign the variable's value, like a loop counter or some changing state. And 3, just avoid var. In any modern JavaScript code you're writing today, there's really no good reason to reach for it anymore. And this really brings us to our final thought. The move from var to let and const wasn't just about adding new keywords. It was a fundamental shift in the language toward writing safer, more predictable, and easier to debug code. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. How can something as small as a single keyword change not just what our code does, but how we think about it in the first place?